This is Dan, and this is the Napkin Academy. Good lesson today. Today we're going to be introducing vivid flowcharts, which are going to be our visual equivalent of our verbal verbs. A simple idea that I want to talk with you about today. We can use flowcharts to represent or replace or complement verbs and verb phrases. What does that mean? Well, let's draw that out. Last week, I, Dan, flew from California here to Amsterdam over here in order to give a workshop. Now that's what I did. I flew. That's my verb. I flew, and I'm representing that verb with this particular arrow that goes from one place to the next. If I was to simplify that a little bit, get rid of the map background, what I might find is I have what we're going to call a flowchart. We started out with me over here. I did something which took me to this other place over here. Now let's talk a little bit about Amsterdam. You know, it's beautiful. It's obviously a city that's located very near to the water, and it has lots of canals through the city. And in fact, if we were to look at Amsterdam from above, we would see that the city is in fact built around a series of canals. We see the canals going like this, wrapping around the city itself, and centered on Central Station, which is right here, the main train station. And where I was last week, where I was actually doing my Napkin Academy live session in Amsterdam, was I was staying in this hotel right here, right near Central Station, and in fact that's where we had our workshop. Now, what's interesting is if we step back and look at a map, here's actually a very, very old map of Amsterdam, we see that it is a city sitting on the water. Now, for those of you who are paying attention, you might notice that this map is actually upside down because for whatever reason, when it was drawn, north was drawn to the bottom. So I've turned it around to make it understandable. And if we were to zoom out a little bit more, we'd see that Amsterdam, which is located right here, is of course located in the Netherlands, which is a place which is surrounded by a tremendous amount of water. Here's of course the North Sea leaking into the country down here, the former Zuiderzee here extended right off the North Sea leaking into the country there. So you have a nation which is completely surrounded by water. Well, over many hundreds of years, the Dutch have of course built many, many dikes, and this is actually a diagram of something called the Delta Works, which in this case takes place in the southern part of Netherlands, down by Rotterdam, where a series of dams and dikes have been built in order to control the flow of water coming in and out of the country. Now, why have I spent time talking about this? Because remember what we're going to talk about today are flow charts, diagrams that monitor the activity of something else. In this case, I thought it was a perfect example to use Amsterdam's location on the water to talk about flow. So let's introduce our concept of flowcharts with looking at how do these docks actually manage the flow of water. So here we have what we're going to call a little series of maps. For those of you who've been with me for a while, you know that when I talk about a map, I simply mean a diagram, a drawing, that shows us the relative location of items in space. So here's a little boat on the water, and here are some doors, and the boat comes in. Oh, but interesting now, in picture 2, the boat is now in this place. Picture 3, the doors close. Picture 4, water gets pumped in to this lock. Picture 5, as the water comes in, the boat rises. Picture 6, the doors on the uphill side open. And picture number 7 is the boat leaves. So what we've seen is a series of maps combined with a sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What happens if we combine a map with a sequence, which we got to call a timeline? So we combine our map with a timeline. If we add those up, we're going to get a new kind of a picture. We're going to get a picture that we're going to call a flowchart. Flowcharts are brilliant when it comes to illustrating how does something work. Back in 1949, 1949, there was a New Zealand economist, a guy by the name of Bill Phillips, who decided that he wanted to illustrate how the English national economy worked. He was studying at the London School of Economics at that time. And so what Dr. Phillips ended up doing is building something called the MONIAC computer, which stands for Monetary National Income Analog Computer. MONIAC, what it really was it was a computer composed of water, meant to use water to simulate money, to show how money flows literally through the national economy. So if we were to look at a flowchart diagram of MONIAC, it actually looks something like this. Water is pumped up to the top in the form of income. Our water in this case equals money, or in this case, of course, it was the pound. Income comes in, and then it gets taxed, and some of the water flows this way, and some of the water comes into savings, and some of that goes into surplus balances, and some of that goes off to a spare, and some of that then gets spent on imports, and some of that comes back in the form of exports, and you get a minimum working balance. The point is, this is literally one of the greatest examples ever of a flowchart, because what Dr. Phillips did was create a model of how money flows through the economy by using a physical three-dimensional flowchart. I thought that was pretty brilliant. In a similar vein, and using water again, a woman named Donella Meadows, who was introduced to me in concept by Maria, who's on the phone with us this morning. Thanks again, Maria, because I've gotten a tremendous amount of mileage out of reading the works of Donella Meadows. Donella Meadows, back in the 1970s, was working at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, along with her business partners and her academic partners, developing something that became known as systems thinking. And what Donella was working on is the idea that if you look at the economy or if you look at the environment, it's possible to model out global systems, really systems thinking, by imagining that you have an inflow of resources matched by an outflow of resources. And the analogy that she used to begin to build systems thinking was actually imagine that you have a bathtub, and you have an inlet, and you have a drain, and you have some amount of water in the bathtub, which is coming from some source and going to some source. One of the greatest examples of a very simple flowchart ever. Now, once you understand Donella Meadows' basic model of the bathtub, it's possible to take that model and apply it to increasingly complex models of how economics works. So here was a model that Donella worked on that actually showed how an automobile factory might work from a systems perspective. And so her flowchart starts with this bathtub in the middle that is an inventory of cars for sale that are sitting on the car lot. The inflow, of course, is deliveries, so cars that are coming in by train or by truck. And the outflow in this case is sales, so people who are buying those cars. And then what she was able to plot in using this flowchart are the numerous influences that have an impact on how does this system work. There may be delays in delivery. Customer demand determines how many sales are going to be. The flow of cars to sales. There is perceived sales, there's a perception delay, there's a desired inventory, there may be a discrepancy, there may be orders to the factory, there may be a response delay on the part of the factory. The point that she was trying to illustrate is you can't just manufacture X number of cars and expect to sell X number of cars without understanding the flow of the entire system. Now, Donella and her team started to create models that showed this sort of ebb and flow of economics and resources around the world. And one of the things that Donella came away from in the end was this. The world is a complex, interconnected, finite, ecological, social, psychological, economic system. Hence, systems thinking. Hence, her tub with inflows and outflows. But we treat it as if it were not, as if it were a divisible, separate, simple, and infinite, where we take and we just look at one piece at a time. Our persistent, intractable global problems arise directly from this mismatch. In other words, not being able to look at the world as a system causes massive problems. Why might it be that we continually make this mistake? Well, maybe it has something to do with how our brain works. Evolutionarily speaking, we've evolved over the millions of years to have a brain that works in the following way. Let's just draw a quick little picture of ourselves. So we have senses. We have our eyes, we have our mouth, we have our nose, we have our ears, we have our touch. Those senses come in through all of those sense receptors that we have and get processed in our reptilian brain, and then we take behaviors because of that. We humans are, of course, particularly blessed because we have this very sophisticated neocortex, which allows us to do a whole lot more sophisticated processing and take a whole lot more sophisticated behaviors. Perhaps one of the issues that Donella was mentioning is because we look at the world through our senses, we have a tendency to see things as discrete, touchable, tasteable, viewable items. And it's very difficult for us to look at them in a whole. This is where our flowcharts are going to help us. Well, over the last several lessons where we talked about our portraits and we talked about our maps and we talked about our timelines, we were really focusing in our verbal model on pretty much the subject side of the equation. Who is existing and where are they and at what time do they interact? Well, now what we want to start to focus on with our flowcharts is more the predicate side, the verbal side. What is the action that's taking place? What is it that's happening? What is it that somebody's doing? This is where our flowcharts start to come in and help us. Vivid stands for visual, to complement our verbal in the form of interdependent thinking. The idea being combining our visual with our verbal makes us able to think a whole lot more clearly. Why is this important? Because sometimes when words are delivered to us, they aren't particularly clear. What we want to be able to do is add on a visual layer to complement them to make our ideas much more vivid. And what we're talking about as we go through today's lesson is the fact that we've already discussed, looking at our vivid grammar graph, the nouns of our world through the portraits. We've talked about the adjectives, our charts. We've talked about location, prepositions through our maps. We've even talked about tense. When do things happen through our timelines? And now we're combining two of these, our maps and our timelines, to allow us to create our flowcharts that are the verbal and visual view of what we do, the verbs. On our balance, we know that our fox is full of verbs. I ran, I did, I will, I moved, I eat, I shall, have, done, it, I can. All kinds of verbs. Whereas our hummingbird over here says, okay, I did it. I moved it. I shifted it. Perhaps even I ate it, by showing our flowcharts. A flowchart, a combination of a map plus a timeline. The physical location, the spatial location of our items, the temporal location of our items put together to show, well, here's where they are and here's how they change. And now, unlike our simple timelines, we have the ability with a flowchart to actually indicate cause and effect and to have things move back and forth and replenish themselves just like Donella's bathtub. Here's a simple example of a little flowchart. How might something work? Well, let's say that at time 1, at my beginning, I had two items. I had two things. One was an unhappy baby, and the other one was an apple. Well, if I take my apple and I use it to make an apple pie, and then I feed that apple pie to that baby, I end up with a very happy baby and an empty pie pan. There's a flowchart of how I might make a baby happy. What we're really representing with our flowcharts are something that we call verb phrases. The idea that I do something. We've accounted for the I with our portraits. Here's me. I do something, somewhere, at some time. Well, we've accounted for the somewhere with our map. I was over here, then I moved over here, and we accounted for the sometime with our timeline, A, B, C. But what we haven't really accounted for yet is, what did I do? This is where our flowchart helps us, because what we're going to see is these arrows that we draw. If I'm here and I make this happen, and then maybe this happens over here, what we're focusing on are these arrows. This idea of did, flowed, moved. It's the arrows that we're particularly interested in because they represent the actions that our other characters took on our stage and in the time that we already drew. How do we go about drawing a flowchart? Well, first of all, we have to collect whatever it is that we know. So we have to collect who are we talking about, or what are we talking about? How many of them do we have? Where are they? And when do they happen? Then we plot these in to a cause and effect sequence chain. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, and maybe there are feedback loops. Maybe something else went back. Then what we do is we actually run the chain. We start the model. In the case of Dunella Meadows, we put the water into the tub, and then we see what happens. Rather than my asking you to draw a flowchart, what I'm going to do is ask us to kind of draw one together. How do I decide to go out to dinner? Interesting question. Well, let's go ahead and start off by drawing in our characters. So when it comes to me deciding how I go to dinner, it's rarely just me, because very often my wife is also involved in that question, and very often my daughters are involved in that question too. So we've now established our cast of characters. Who? And what? Well, we certainly want some food. We've already decided, here's me. Am I hungry? Yes, or possibly no. If no, my decision is not to go out to eat. If I'm not hungry, there's no reason to go out. But if my decision was yes, what I then do is I go to Isabel and I ask her, are you hungry? If she says no, we don't go out to dinner. If, however, Isabel says yes, then we decide to go to dinner. We might look at the web to see what's a good restaurant. We find one. Do we like that one? If yes, let's go. If we think no, we don't particularly like that one, we go back and look again. And in the end, we end up at a particular restaurant where we both eat, and now we are no longer hungry. And what's interesting is that as we see something as simple as, going out to eat, look at how many variables, how many inflection points and decision points there are in something just as simple as this. Now we can imagine how complex things get in the real world. So let's go ahead and do a real world case study where I'd like to share with you some flowcharts that I created for a real client of mine a couple of years ago. I want to share this with you to give you a sense of how these things actually work in the real world. The client in this case is a fictitious company, I can't tell you who it really is, which we're going to call YYY. And this is an online company, and this is a company that generates a tremendous amount of content. And so here was the presentation that we made to the executives to try to convince them to help the content team change the way they worked. We started out and we said, there are 3 things that we want to share with you today. The first one is, content at our company really matters. There's lots of it, but today's content approach has many challenges. If you look at it, it's really kind of a mess. It wasn't set up particularly well to grow, and it hasn't scaled very well. However, the good news is we have some good options to help fix those challenges and make what was once a very complicated process actually quite seamless. Let's continue on. Who at this company is involved with content? Side note, I want you to pay attention again to how this story is being told. What is the first picture that we're drawing? We're not drawing a flowchart right away. The first thing that we're doing, as always, is we are starting by drawing our portrait. We're identifying who are our characters. So in the case of content, we said, well, who touches content? And on our project teams, we have business people, project managers, user interaction designers, visual designers, etc. They all touch content. Our development teams, our project managers, our technical architects, and our developers, they also touch content. Our localization teams and our vendors, they come in contact with our content. And our international content managers, this being an international company, also come in contact with our content. Then our customer support teams certainly need to be able to have access to that content, because who is the content for? It's for all our customers out there, who are the ones who are accessing and reading the content. Wow, there are a lot of people involved in content. So what content are we talking about? Well, we could go through each character and say, what are the content questions and pieces of content that they're coming in touch with? And there are lots of them. When we look at it like this, we realize that the entire company of YYY, in many ways, is just a big content delivery system. And if content isn't being delivered well, the company's in problem. Where is this content and what is it? It resides in multiple different databases. Each one of those databases has different types of content. The problem is each one of these databases or repositories has a different owner, a different process, and different timing. And here now, finally, appears our flowchart. Our present content system is challenging. What we've done here is we put together a map of all of those different characters that we identified before. Here's content people, here's content managers, here's our designers, all the people we put together before, superimposed on a timeline of when do those pieces of content move through, and then included all of the various interactions. So just in one case, a user interface designer creates a wireframe. A visual designer creates an image file, and a content manager creates a document. Those documents all flow together into a page mockup, which gets reviewed. But it's not just one type of page mockup, there are multiple types, etc. Now what I'd like you to pay attention to as we go through this flowchart is, wow, right away it starts to get complicated. Isn't it amazing? Just when we drew something as simple as how do we go to dinner, it became complicated. Imagine now the interaction of tens of dozens of people around the world. So what we decided to do was, in order to point out what about this flowchart makes things challenging, is let's go ahead and annotate the flowchart. Something that the moment a flowchart becomes complicated is very important for us to do. We circle things and we say at this point in the flowchart we lack the ability to find all of the instances of a given type of content. Remember when we walked through these multiple formats? Multiple formats means we can't consistently share content. Lots of challenges, and in the end we don't always get the content we meant to, and we don't even know how it's being used once it's live. So here our flowchart, which is an accurate model of the process of how content works, is complicated. Because the process is complicated, it becomes difficult to read, so we have to show our viewer how to go through it and make sense of it. But guess what? At this particular company, it becomes even more complex, because here we're adding international onto this flowchart. So everything we see here in purple adds on international levels. We need to determine global priorities of content. Then we have localization teams that are moving into alternate languages. Then we have to get everybody together to be able to launch our multiple systems. Point being, now the system with the layering on of international becomes complicated to a point that it's unsustainable. So we have a solution, which is represented by two baby flowcharts. One, we propose that there be a company-wide information architecture supported by a company-wide taxonomy, and that company-wide workflow engine could be based on a services-oriented architecture approach, which simply means layers, without needing to rebuild the entire system. So from our flowchart solution perspective, we said our solution starts with three foundational components. 1, a single front end. 2, global search capability. 3, a global editing system. Those are the beginnings. Let's go add on something else. Search is enabled by the taxonomy. Editing is enabled by a unified request system. So now what we've done is we've added in 2 more layers. Layer number 4, which is our global taxonomy, supported by a taxonomy engine, and 5 is our unified request system, which has a basic set of standard templates so that anyone requesting a new type of content can use the same forms to do it. The entire system then supports cross-team requirements management, which is in turn enabled by a common workflow engine. Item number 6, the final layer here. There is a requirements management system that is centralized and can be monitored, which then allows for a common workflow engine, essentially a series of flows in and out that enable us to make sure that all of these layers are interacting. If we do this, we would be able to move from our present state of chaos to a system that is smooth and seamless and scalable for our company YYY. A couple of lessons I want to point out to you from this case study. Number 1, what did we do? We started out by drawing the who, the what, the where, the how much, and the when. Only then did we draw the flowchart. Why? Because flowcharts by definition are complex, and we rarely want to introduce an idea with a flowchart. It's much more effective to introduce the idea through our simpler pictures and then build to our flowchart. And you'll also notice, even once I introduced the flowchart, I did it as a series of builds. Lesson number 1 then, we want to create our flowcharts as a build. I found this very funny little flowchart that asks the question, am I a horse? And I want to take you through this. Here's how a flowchart actually works. Question number 1, are you a horse? Well, I have 3 options. I could say no, I'm not a horse. I could say yes, I am a horse, or I could say maybe. All right, well, let's go ahead and say no, I'm not a horse. Let's do the build. What happens next is we get dropped down and we're told, okay, if I said no, then you know what? I'm not a horse. But I had some options, remember? What if I'd said, maybe I am, I'm unsure, or yes, in fact, I am a horse? Well, the next question says, okay, how many legs do you walk on? If my answer is 2, then guess what? I was wrong, and I'm not a horse. But if I said that I walked on 4 legs, the next question is, well, really? Let's validate that one more time. Yes, I really do walk on 4 legs, or no, I don't. Well, in either case, the answer is then the next decision. Can you read and write? And if the answer is yes, well, regardless of how many legs you walk on, you are not a horse. And if you answered no, then guess what? You're lying because you're reading this, which means that you're reading and you're not a horse. Point being, if you can even look at a flowchart, you are not a horse. Unless, of course, you are a talking horse, perhaps named Mr. Ed. Mr. Ed, for those of you who don't know, was a television show a long time ago about a horse who could talk. I thought this was pretty funny, but the point I wanted to make is, you see, if I'd introduced this flowchart to you all at once, it would have been cognitive dissonance. But if we introduce the flowchart step at a time, and we allow us to follow through and make the decisions along with it, even something as complicated as deciding whether or not I'm a horse becomes relatively straightforward. Lesson 2, as much as possible when we build a flowchart, let your viewer connect the dots. I thought that a great example here would be some of the most well-respected flowcharts ever created. These are Feynman Diagrams, frequently cited. The work of course, Dr. Richard Feynman, who we've mentioned before in lessons, one of the great thinkers of the last century, nuclear physicist, theoretical physicist, who invented Feynman diagrams to describe visually the activity of subatomic particles. And what would happen was Richard Feynman came up with a visual language that would describe the interaction of electrons and protons and photons so that it could be illustrated in a picture. Now, what's interesting here is that learning subatomic particles by looking at Feynman diagrams is very good. But actually drawing the diagrams is even better, because it is the act of drawing them that forces the student's mind to think them through. This is important because if you think about it, building the diagrams dot by dot is where the real insights begin to take place, because look at the potential complexity of everything that's going on from a mathematical perspective in a Feynman diagram. A simple line with an arrow is represented by this entire mathematical equivalent. And even something that appears visually to be this understandable, if we had to break it down with the non-visual, becomes something that's extraordinarily complex. So if we let people build the diagram with us, build the flowchart with us, it becomes much clearer in everybody's mind what's actually going on. So back to our horse, what I mean is I could show a very complicated flowchart of what it means to be a horse, or I could say, let me have my viewer help by connecting the dots that I provide. By moving across my flowchart from one point to another, I provided the data, I provided the structure, I provided the guides, and as we go through, what we find is if I am the one who creates the picture by connecting the dots, I'm the one who sees what was in it, and I'm the one who says, aha, you know what? Maybe I really am a horse. Lesson number 3, and then we'll turn this over to some homework. This is a big one. We've been drawing lots of arrows. This thing becomes this thing. What's really going on in that arrow? Because remember, that arrow is a verb. It represents action. And what kind of action does it really represent? For anybody who's interested in trying to figure out what's actually going on in that arrow, I strongly recommend this book by, of course, Edward Tufte, the famous data visualization expert. This book is called Beautiful Evidence. And starting with this chart, which was drawn in 1936 by a gentleman named Alfred Barr, who at the time was head of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Alfred Barr created this poster for the 1936 initial exhibition of Cubist art, something that nobody had really seen before. And in order to make it interesting, what he said is he created this poster that said in the 1890s, he created a flowchart. How do we get to Cubist art? We had Neo-Impressionism, we had Synthesism, Japanese prints which influenced Van Gogh, which influenced Fauvism, and then we had African sculpture which influenced Cubism, and then we had that influencing Futurism and Abstract Expressionism and Dadaism. And what he was trying to map out was the flow of art history to show, if this is where we are today, why would you want to come to my museum exhibition? Edward Tufte goes through in this book with a great chapter on what do these various arrows actually mean. So last thoughts, the reason that we want to use our flowcharts, there's really two. We want to show how it works today so that we can show how it might be better. In order to do that, we have to first of all understand we have all of our players, we have their locations, we're able to map out what happens today, which allows us to then say, well, if I did it better, maybe I could add in something even more. That's why we want to have our flowcharts. So with that, it's going to be your turn. Here's your homework assignment for the next couple of weeks on flowcharts. I would like you to draw one basic flowchart from this list. The process I go through when I decide to go see a movie. How do I decide to choose a mobile phone? How do I cook a turkey? Those are the basics. Then, with one of those warm-ups done, I'd like you to draw a flowchart that illustrates how you are going to grow your business. A little hint. Start, as we always do, with me and see where your flowchart takes you. And with that, it's time for some student work. Quick review, our last assignment was about timelines, and I'd asked you to draw your ideal day as a timeline, or perhaps your family history, or perhaps the 5 most important events in history, and then perhaps a timeline of your favorite movie, or a timeline of your favorite project. Frederic, are you able to hear me? I've got your phone turned on.
Yes.
Okay, excellent, Frederic. So what we're going to do is we're going to skip past Deborah's work for a moment, and I'm going to take you to your work. And Frederic was nice enough to draw some incredible pictures. And could you just give us a few words about each one of these pictures?
Yes, with this picture I try to play with the idea of 5 moments of the history to deliver a very self-oriented vision of and so I choose my Christian education, so I choose the death and resurrection. I live in Mulhouse, so I choose the date of the foundation of this city with a legend, and I choose the crowning of Louis XIII, Declaration of Human Rights in France, and Man on the Moon.
Wonderful. Can you tell us very quickly, Frederic, what is the story of the foundation of Mulhouse? This looks like a great little picture.
Yeah, it's a story with a mill. There was a battle with Attila, and there was a soldier of Attila. He found a mill with a young woman, and the woman protect this soldier, and at this place the city was founded, was created. So it's a kind of legend. It's
a love story, isn't it?
Yeah, very love story.
That's wonderful. I'm going to look up the history of Mulhouse. I've been there, but I didn't know the story. Well, Frederic, this is a wonderful timeline. And let's go ahead. I think that you have one that was a timeline of a movie, and you did a magnificent job. This thing is incredible. Can you just take us a little bit through what you're representing here?
Yes, but after this lesson, I think it's a kind of flowchart, isn't it?
It is, but that's okay because a flowchart is really the next step after a timeline. So let's go ahead and consider it a timeline and walk us through the flow as well.
Mm-hmm. My intention was to show in the same drawing the time with the key moments of the film. So the film, it's a crazy film with a lot of actions, with a lot of characters, crazy people, and I tried to find the key moments of the film. And at the same time, my challenge was to show different actions. There was action in the cellar because there was a lot of dead bodies in.
Keep going. Okay.
Yeah. So in the cellar, it was the home for dead bodies, and at the bottom of the drawing, I tried to show that it is still a love story. So there is the woman waiting for the man, but the man has a lot of problem with the dead bodies, and she.
Keep going. Okay.
And at the end, she succeeds in take this man and go for a honeymoon.
So it starts here, and this flow of the love story goes along the bottom here and then ends up over here. Is that right?
Exactly.
Frederic, this drawing is so fantastic. I'm going to ask you, is it possible for me to post it as a downloadable PDF on Napkin Academy so people can take a look at it? Could I do that?
Why not?
Okay, I'm going to do that. So for the next time, I'm going to add a PDF file associated with this lesson so people, if they'd like to, can download this. It's really fantastic. And Frederic, in that spirit, maybe you could take us very quickly through your flowchart of your business.
Yes, it's very simple. There is 3 categories. Now my time is to develop my skills because I'm not a professional in visual thinking, so I try to collect the more of information, the more the more training session like this.
Here's a Napkin Academy. Oh, excellent. Oh, A+ for you. You get a 10 on 10 for this one.
Thank you. And I try to install my business in a studio with my wife, who is an artist. I try to create my website. All I must build is the infrastructure of the business. And at the bottom, I try to represent a lot of tests I make at this moment with different people. I try to have some experience is, for example, whiteboard selling, demo video. I try to look around the visual field to find where I am the best. So I try to offer my service to some clients, and after May or June, I will go to paying service.
Excellent. And then business becomes business.
Yeah.
Frederick, this is fantastic. Your work is remarkable. It is worth studying as well. And it's interesting from a timeline perspective. You've really done a tremendous job. And of course, as you pointed out, it was a great example with your previous drawing of arsenic and old lace, which started as a timeline. We recognize, and this is good for our lesson today, that once I start to put together time with cause and effect, with action, this is when I start to get the pictures we're talking about today, which is our flow chart. So with that, Frederick, I thank you so much for sharing this. Incredible drawings. I will post them online for people to take a look at. And I'm going to sign off now. Deborah, I don't know if we were able to get you back on. Deborah DeLu, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here, Dan.
Oh, Deborah, you made it. Fantastic. Okay. So here, let me back up really quickly. And Deborah, can you take us through your homework? So let me just get us back to your pictures. Okay, and here we go. Deborah?
So this was my ideal day. I love to take photographs, so I thought I'd like to start in the morning with taking some pictures of the sunrise. And my family, we like to ride bikes, so we could go for a ride during the day and have a picnic and enjoy the weather. When I drew this, it was very nice. Today it's very cold.
Wonderful.
So spending time with my family and doing enjoyable things is sort of what I was representing there.
And what a wonderful timeline, because you've gone from sunrise all the way through to sunset, haven't you?
Yes.
Wonderful. I have to tell you, as I was looking at this drawing, it made me feel really happy too. This is exactly what I'd love to do. Wonderful drawing. And now, why don't you take us through your perspective? You did a timeline. Tell us what your timeline was.
This is the five most important events in history, and as I started doing some research to figure out how I wanted to, what I wanted to include, one of the things that came up was sort of like the invention of mass communication. And I used to work in the printing field, so it was interesting to me, so I started sort of taking it from that perspective. And mass communication started in Mesopotamia with the introduction of writing on clay tablets. So the information could be recorded in a systematic fashion and presented to other people. And then the next major invention was in China. They invented woodblock printing there. And then in Germany, Gutenberg introduced the Gutenberg press, and the Gutenberg Bible was a byproduct of that. And that really hinged upon molded, movable type. So we had those two work together. Without the molded, movable type, the Gutenberg press would not have been feasible. And then I thought the next major leap was the computer age, and ENIAC was the first successful digital electronic computer, and that really was that paved the way for sort of everybody's computers. And then I thought, mass communication really took off when the World Wide Web was introduced in France. So that was my timeline. And then I put a little map to sort of show where these places were.
This is fantastic. So you've combined our where with our when. And of course, in keeping with the lesson today, when we would figure out a way to put the two of them together, we're going to end up with a flowchart. Well, Deborah, that's incredible work. This is really remarkable. I appreciate your effort in putting your homework together. All of you that are on the call now, thanks for staying with us. We've had an extra long session today. I hope it's been useful. You have your homework assignment, and I hope to see all of you again soon. It reminds me, one last quick one I wanted to share with you was as I was in Amsterdam last week, obviously, as I told you, running the Napkin Academy session there, and one of our participants, a guy named Mark, who was from Scotland, the day after he returned home, he'd been away from a couple of days, he sent me this note because this was a note from his son, who I believe is in kindergarten, and the son came home from school with this pupil response sheet to homework. I thought this was kind of torturous. The idea was the parents and the child were supposed to think through, what is it that's fun about homework, good things about homework, and then write their assignment of what they think homework should be about. And so I thought it was interesting. Mark's son said homework, two good things are math and coloring, which I really loved, but then I have to show you the bottom of the sheet because I wish homework could be more drawing. And there we have the most perfect example ever. And so you all have homework which is involved in drawing. So take advantage of the desires of Mark's son and let's do some drawing. Hey, thank you all for another great lesson. This is Dan signing off from the Napkin Academy, but don't go away. Now on our new platform, you can still submit your homework. Debbie, our community manager, is going to join you right now to show you exactly how to do that. And I really encourage you, do your homework. Okay, take it away, Debbie. See you soon.
We hope you enjoyed this Napkin Academy classic video. We've made it easier than ever to share your homework. After you've completed your homework and have a JPEG or PNG file saved on your computer, come back to this course. Once you're back here, scroll to the bottom of the screen, and in the comments box, you can add a comment. I'm just going to call this one My Homework. You can also add images by clicking on the Insert Edit Image button here. In the source box, click on the file. In the Images window, click on Upload, and then click on Add Files. This is going to take you to your computer where you can search for your images. I'm just going to search for mine in Pictures, and I'm going to choose this image here. You can also add multiple images here. Click Upload. After the upload is complete, click Close. Then scroll down, and you'll see that the last image is here, and it's checked. This is the one we just uploaded. Click Insert. I suggest in the Dimensions box you change the maximum to 1200 pixels and leave the Constrained Proportions box checked. You can also add an image description here if you'd like. Click OK. You'll see that your image has been added to your comment. And now the last step, the most important one, make sure that you click the green comment button here to upload your homework to the Napkin Academy. We hope to see your homework soon.